Why do people dislike Spartan 4s? This is a bit of a controversial topic in the Halo community, and it's not really something that has a simple answer like many things. Just as many people dislike the Spartan 4s, there are just as many who enjoy them, who love them, who will passionately defend them. I personally consider myself among the latter group. However, the resentment that some feel doesn't come from nowhere. It's a result of poor presentation, bad execution, and questionable decisions on 343 Industries' part. However, it is also equally the fault of the community for misunderstanding, misrepresenting, or contributing to a very toxic environment under the guise of criticism or humor. The current generation of Spartans are better than people think they are, not just from a lore perspective, but also from a writing perspective. However, that lore, that writing, it was preceded by some very poor decisions as mentioned a moment ago. I'm going to get right into it, but just keep one thing in mind. This is an opinion video. Although I've looked extensively into what I'm going to present, I love Halo lore, I have always been way down the rabbit hole with this kind of thing. It's still an opinion. You are welcome to disagree with me if you dislike the Spartan 4s, but I do ask that you at the very least give me a fair shake and listen to what I have to say. Let's start with what went wrong with the initial presentation. At the end of the day, a lot of the issues people have with the Spartan 4s come down to poor first impressions. The first time you see a Spartan 4 will be in Halo 4. The Master Chief links up with the UNSC for the first time in years. A massive warship, the UNSC Infinity, has crashed into the planet of Requiem. Things are hectic, chaotic, and it's looking increasingly like the Didact, our new big bad guy, is going to get what he wants. That's when the Chief and Cortana meet up with the officer Thomas Lasky, a group of Marines, some Spartan 4s, and one Sarah Palmer. For the first few seconds, a player might be tempted to look at the group of Spartans that emerge with interest. They're professional, they don't stop to look at the Chief because they know they're on a battlefield, and their armor looks interesting, and it's unique compared to what we used to have. This is a first for a Halo game as well. We have Spartans who are not part of the main cast. In Halo Reach, we saw Noble Team, yes, but we never saw random nameless Spartans alive. This is meant to signal that time has moved on since the Chief went to sleep. The UNSC has evolved and a new generation of Spartans has arrived. Then Sarah steps into the scene without her protective helmet on in the middle of a battlefield. Again, there's no statement that it's been damaged, she just walks out and gives one order. This is where everything falls apart with one single line.
I thought you'd be taller.
This is the line that set the community off, arguably more than it should have in some ways, but understandably so nonetheless. Obviously, Sarah wasn't directly trying to antagonize the Chief here. It was clearly meant to be a humorous prod designed to show off her character. You know how in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, everyone's dressed normally, and then you have the one flashy character that we all know is the stand user? It's the same logic here. Sarah is supposed to stand out because she's supposed to be a major character going forward. The goal here isn't to set up a character who is antagonistic or disrespectful towards the player, and by extension the Chief and Cortana. No, the standout armor, lack of a helmet, the brief one-liner, it's just meant to introduce a character who has a little bit of a hot streak to her. But it doesn't go over well. Why? Well, for starters, we've had character introductions where right off the cuff they're making comments towards the Chief. In Halo Combat Evolved, Cortana and the Chief have an interesting opening interaction, where the Chief has to warn her off of trying anything with the armor.
Your architecture isn't much different from the Autumn's.
Don't get any funny ideas.
In the early parts of Halo 2, Johnson implies to the Chief that he should have, quote, worn something nice.
You told me there wouldn't be any cameras.
And you told me you were gonna wear something nice.
Because power armor isn't nice. And it's supposed to be a bit of a snarky comment over the Chief complaining about cameras being present. Why did these two scenes work, whereas Sarah's introduction didn't? Well, let's just start with the differences between the scenes, the context for them. We were not introduced to Johnson and Cortana through the snarky, humorous interactions. Halo CE had an entire opening cutscene without the Chief, a cutscene where we were introduced to Cortana, to Johnson, to Jacob Keyes. We got a good idea of who these characters were, what they did, and what they were like before the game really even started. In Johnson's case, Halo 2 was his first outing as quote-unquote main character, or a main character. While in Halo Combat Evolved, he was kind of there, he's front and center in Halo 2. This means that the second game goes out of its way to introduce you, or rather reintroduce you to Johnson, while also hyping up the impending Battle of Earth. So when Johnson fired back at Chief with, "I thought you were going to wear something nice," you couldn't help but laugh because you already knew this character to some extent. You understood how it goes with him, and you knew from the first game that he's earned this job. This man survived the Covenant, the Flood, and the first Halo ring. As far as the audience was concerned, he was able to stand on equal footing with the Master Chief himself. Furthermore, it's clearly supposed to be a scene of witty banter. The Chief begins the interaction. The Chief starts this banter, even if it's not intentional. The Chief is basically admonishing the fact that there are cameras present because, he's not a very social individual, and Johnson fires back with, "I thought you were going to wear something nice," as basically a, "Stop complaining, just enjoy the moment."
Folks need heroes, Chief, to give them hope. So smile, would ya? Well, we still got something to smile about.
Fast forward to Halo 4, Sarah is a fresh character that nobody knows about. The audience doesn't know about the Spartan 4s. The audience doesn't know Sarah. She has never appeared in any previous game, even as a Marine or background character. She's completely new. So when this new character emerges, behaving very quote-unquote un-Spartan-like, as opposed to previous depictions of Spartans, and proceeds to give what can be taken as a disrespectful line, even if that wasn't the intent, people are going to be taken aback. This is the Master Chief. This is John 117. This is the man who destroyed a Halo ring, survived the Flood 3 times, broke the Covenant, and saved the galaxy back to back with the Arbiter. The audience has spent 3 games and 11 years growing attached to this character, loving this character, enjoying this character, and it's even more potent of a connection for individuals that read the books. When they take something as an insult towards the Chief, it really feels like a jab at their experiences with the character in their heart of hearts. That's why to this day, you will find references to the "I thought you'd be taller" line when it comes to resentment towards the Spartan 4s. When really, in actuality, the goal was simply to introduce a character while fitting in with a wider theme of Halo 4. Halo 4 has a theme going on in the background that occasionally comes front and center. The Master Chief has been replaced, or will be replaced. The UNSC can now make Spartans, and lots of them. Halo 4 is about the Chief, John, finding his humanity, so to speak, while also reestablishing himself as that guy, that legend, that badass for the wider UNSC. I'd also like to point out that Sarah's opening quip towards the Chief is put into perspective in the final cutscene, when John towers over everyone, her included. It's deliberately ironic. It doesn't help that characters like Del Rio, however, continuously talk down to 2 very iconic characters, further solidifying the notion that other characters are also behaving disrespectfully or rudely. But you know what? Bad first impressions can always be fixed. At the end of the day, one misinterpreted line that was executed poorly doesn't have to doom everything. And good news, Halo 4 has a second campaign, Spartan Ops, where you will be playing as your own Spartan 4 under the command of Sarah Palmer, Captain Lasky, and the wider crew of the UNSC Infinity. You are heading back to Requiem to kick Julam Dama's Covenant knockoff out. With the unfortunate taste left in the audience's mouth by Palmer, you'd hope that Spartan Ops, a miniature episodic campaign focused entirely on the Fours, would really step its game up. That we'd be introduced to a myriad of fascinating new Spartans who will become mainstays of the franchise going forwards. Unfortunately, we got these guys. Majestic. Look, I love the Spartan Fours. I really do. I will go out of my way to defend them. That said, outside of Thorn, there is no defending this fire team. I understand wanting to show a more human take on the Spartans, especially because the latest generation is created from consenting adults who have had time to live their lives, so to speak. That said, if you want to add normalcy or humanity to a character like a Spartan, you don't do this.
Well, Madsen and me, we were just making sure the ladies of Rio de Janeiro felt safe and secure.
That's right. Just Fire Team Majestic doing a little community outreach, man.
That's right.
Majestic is awful. I'm sorry, they just are. They come across as arrogant, trashy, socially inept, inconsiderate douchebags. First of all, people don't talk like this.
Yeah? And where were you, DeMarco?
Don't get me wrong, there are absolutely people that will behave in the same vein as Fireteam Majestic, but their lines, their actions, their mannerisms, it feels forced. It feels as if Majestic has been deliberately made out to be cartoonish high schoolers, also that Spartan Thorn can stand out as the only relatively professional character of the group, or member of the group. And maybe this is just me, and I'm not going to speak for all gals in the Halo community, but I know myself and a couple others were really annoyed by this moment.
Oh, take a look.
Oh my.
I saw it first.
Yeah, sure, Palmer puts them in their place, but dude, it's creepy. Like, don't do shit like that. If your goal was to make a statement about what women sometimes have to put up with, especially in the armed forces, there are better ways of doing it. And it's not like there's any growth from this. There's no point made here, nothing at all. There was no statement made. This interaction right here is there to be there. It isn't like the characters learn anything. They don't. There's no arc, no lesson. You could remove this scene from the entire plot and nothing would change. It genuinely feels like Spartan Ops goes out of its way to make Majestic as unlikable as possible. Worse still, it isn't like Majestic is one way out of combat and another way in combat. No, they are always behaving like this. Again, they have been written to be cartoonishly stupid so that the titular protagonist of the cutscenes can stand out. The only character in their group that's actually interesting and has depth, that would be Thorn. He's not distant or reserved like the Chief is, not at all, but he also knows when to be professional, when to take things seriously, when to put in the work. This results in him earning what is essentially a compliment from Catherine Halsey, who implies that she could have seen him as one of her Spartans. Perhaps.
Perhaps some of you are closer than others.
When he's facing long odds, he fights and doesn't give in until he's physically unable. He's crafty, he's lethal, and he protects people even at the expense of himself. That is what a Spartan should be. A Spartan should be someone who has a personality, but who is more than two-dimensional and is willing to be professional, badass, and most importantly, willing to go out of their way to save the lives of others, to help others, to be the hero. We needed more of Thorn and less of Majestic. What about Palmer? What about Sarah?
The Cubbies. They believe this is the home of one of their gods. Way I see it, if those freaks want to meet God, it's our duty to help them along.
Her first cutscene isn't that bad. In fact, I actually say she's excellent in the first cutscene. She's still true to herself, still true to the characterization we have thus far, but she's also showing off more of why she's a Spartan. She's a leader, she's inspiring, she's not afraid of the enemy, and she has a sense of morals. Later on, she dislikes Halsey because, quite frankly, why wouldn't she? We, the audience, have an attachment to Halsey because we have seen things from her perspective. We have come to terms with the fact that without her work, humanity would have gone extinct, and so we are willing to overlook that at the end of the day, this woman is a monster. She's not a monster that doesn't care. Halsey absolutely cares for her Spartans. There's a reason some might argue she's almost motherly in some twisted sense of the word. She's a very morally gray character to be sure, an excellently written one at that, but nevertheless, it doesn't change the fact that she took nearly 100 6-year-old children from their loving homes and families. She stole their future, their livelihoods, their identities. The only thing these kids were able to keep were their names. She put them through torturous training, invasive, inhumane procedures, and turned them into child soldiers designed to be killing machines for the state. This woman is a monster by the sheer horrific nature of her actions, regardless of why she did them. For that matter, she didn't make the Spartan 2s to fight the Covenant. It was all in the name of crushing human rebellion. I'll add that it makes her a really awesome character for that matter, because you now have to have a debate about the morals behind her. Do the ends justify the means? Should they have tried to find another way, or should they have pressed on given the miracle boon of luck the Spartans served as during the Covenant War? In Sarah's case, she has the same opinion basically any person rationally would have. If you are put face to face with a person like Halsey, a person you know harmed, maimed, and got children killed in a, again, horrific manner, you wouldn't be thrilled to be around her. You'd be pissed. Again, we appreciate Halsey as the audience because we have the benefit of being the audience. So, if I'm being honest, Sarah actually does quite well in Spartan Ops. That isn't to say she's perfect, because although there are a lot of solid moments, there are also moments where the audience is going to go right back to disliking her. Even if from an in-universe perspective, Sarah has every reason to despise Halsey, the audience doesn't. So when she accepts what is essentially a hit on Halsey by the Office of Naval Intelligence, the audience is not going to take too kindly to that. Furthermore, her reaction to failing to kill Halsey is, while human, not professional, and therefore not Spartan-like.
No! No! What the hell are you guys doing here?
Ultimately, much as I love Halo 4 and Spartan Ops, I recognize that when it comes to the Spartan 4s, it gave a really, really bad first impression. This is unfortunate because the material that was released about characters like Palmer goes really far in helping you understand who they are. It's no secret that I used to have a very negative opinion of Palmer, but once I got past the realm of Commander Palmer and into the realm of Sarah Palmer, I actually started to realize how wrong I was about this character. But Halo 4 is just one game. What about the next game?
Covenant reinforcements move on the Elder Council chamber. Time is running low, Spartans.
We'll clear a path to the Arbiter. Just be ready for extraction.
I shall await your signal.
Victory to Planet King.
Halo 5, in terms of portraying Spartan 4s, actually does better. A lot better than Halo 4 and Spartan Ops. Unfortunately, it is also Halo 5. You see, the problem with Halo 5's portrayal isn't that the Spartan 4s are incompetent or childish. The main carriers, the heavy lifters of the Spartan 4s in Halo 5, are the members of Fireteam Osiris. Unfortunately, Fireteam Osiris is not presented well on screen in the sense that unless you have consumed media or material from out of the game, you're just not going to know much about them. Obviously, anyone who has played ODST will recognize someone like Buck, but not necessarily Vale or Locke. The end result is simple. These characters are not good or bad per se, but they are not interesting either. The characters come off as flat or boring, generic, and disappointing. This is compounded by another problem. You spend most of the game playing as these characters while hunting down the Master Chief, the face of the franchise. Halo 5 had a marketing spree presenting the Master Chief as a traitor that you need to hunt down, when in actuality you're hunting down the truth. The actual game, on the other hand, was less that and more a hyped up scavenger hunt where a spooky blue lady that should have been dead is now evil and taking over the galaxy for some random reason. When you do play as the Chief, it is in very brief spurts, and the portrayal of both the Chief and Blue Team in this game borders on character assassination. So you have characters that are on paper uninteresting, hunting down the face of the franchise, trying to catch the Chief and eventually Cortana. The end result is not a bad portrayal. I would actually argue that despite the issues with Halo 5, misrepresenting Spartan 4s isn't one of them. Fireteam Osiris is exceedingly competent, proven as lethal, and does carry the determination and heroics that we see in Spartans. They help where they're needed, but they get business done when they have to. They're intelligent, and the team covers all of the needed bases. That said, one of the biggest issues with Halo 5's Osiris is that we get hints of the talents of each team member without ever fleshing them out. I hate to be accusatory, but it almost comes off as, "Hey, see this really interesting tidbit about this character? Well, you should buy our book or a movie or a previous game to learn about them." Oh, Tanaka has a background in the Outer Colonies, but we don't see her do any of the talking when we get to an actual Outer Colony that's independent. She mentions, a few fun facts or tips, but she's not playing an active role in negotiations when she really should be. Vale understands Sangheili and can speak it fluently, but we never actually get to see her use this talent. She does very little translating, and once again, does not play an active role in negotiations on the planet of Sanghelios. Locke gets some screen time about Oni and his background there, but we don't see him put any of those skills to use. He just kinda strong-arms his way through the plot with the only setback pertaining to the Chief himself. In the case of Buck, although I think they nailed his personality, they really messed up on what he would and wouldn't say in certain situations. I feel a heavy need to remind you all of where this man comes from. His family was literally eaten alive during the Covenant War. He is a survivor of Reach. He went through the entirety of the Battle of Earth, and yet he has no issues with the Arbiter. He goes as far as to call the Swords of Sanghelios brothers just because Vale made a little prayer about their deaths. I do not care what you say to me. In no reality is Edward Buck ever going to look at the Arbiter, at Thel Vadam, formerly Vadami, the Sangheili responsible for the destruction of Reach, and call his Swords of Sanghelios brothers. Period. I think Buck would be professional, he would be courteous, but he would not express camaraderie like that without a lot of personal experience. Bad portrayal? No. Bad writing and character development all around? Abso-fucking-lutely. This is all compounded by the fact that, again, we are hunting the Master Chief as these characters. Attachments to the Chief and Blue Team run deep in Halo, especially for those who have read the books and know who Blue Team happens to be. It doesn't matter how you do it. There will be some resentment or mixed feelings about going against this beloved group of characters. Could Halo 5 have pulled it off? Absolutely, but it needed to be astronomical in its execution. Halo 5 was not astronomical. It was a wet fart. Let's just start by saying this. Halo Infinite has a rock-solid portrayal of the Spartan 4s. It has the best portrayal of the Spartan 4s out of the games that they've been in. These Spartans, despite being prominent mainly in audio logs and, as we'll get to in a minute, a book, are fucking heroes. They took a hopeless situation, looked at it, nodded, and gave it the middle fucking finger. They rallied UNSC Marines, saved lives, performed feats of badassery, and took on the best the Banished had to offer. They held the line just long enough for the Chief to get back in the fight. They had personalities, stories, character. They were people, but they were also Spartans. When it was time to get to work, they were professional, they were competent. Their performance was arguably comparable to that of the Spartan 2s in the old books. And then you find the last of them as the Chief.
I'm going to cut him loose.
It's you. You're alive. Chief, the Banished. I tried to stop them. I tried to...
Easy. You're safe now.
The Banished, they have something they call the Conservatory. That's all I know. It's picked up north of here. Dig site. I couldn't stop them. But you can. You have to.
Consider it done.
Outside of an initial bout of emotional shock, Spartan Griffin immediately spends the last of his energy, his last moments alive, telling the chief anything that could be of use before urging him to find the other Spartans and save the survivors trapped on Zeta Halo. After listening to the audio logs, after reading Rubicon Protocol, Spartan Griffin is one of my favorite Halo characters. The same goes for almost all of the Spartan 4s that Halo Infinite's audio logs and Rubicon Protocol follow. Each and every one of them, Griffin, Stone, Horvath, Kovan, etc., they are the embodiment of what it means to be a Spartan. Defiant to the end, heroic but with a human side. Then we're adding on to this with the Academy, which was abandoned early on in Halo Infinite, sadly. I also believe Spartan Agrena makes for a good depiction of what it means to be a Spartan. Saved by Spartans during the Battle of Earth, she was inspired to become one herself, and she did.
What is a Spartan? A Spartan is a symbol. Hope where there is none. In times of darkness, we are hope.
Post-Halo 5, and especially post-Halo Infinite, the UNSC is in a shitty place. She looked at that and decided that she's going to pick up the pieces and keep up the fight by training a new generation of Spartans herself. She really just said, I can fix them, to the entire UNSC. That takes guts. There are some people that think she should have been a bit more of a hard-ass as an instructor, but that's really somewhat stemming from a misconception that particularly Americans commonly have about how it goes in the armed forces, and I don't say this condescendingly. I had this misconception as well for a while. For those of you that aren't in the know, the United States generally has these really tough drill sergeants, in particular branches like the Marines and Army. And so between movies and documentaries and also firsthand experience from people who were and are still in the United States Armed Forces, there is this general assumption in the US that this is just normal everywhere. In actuality, it's not. It's actually kind of frowned upon by many foreign militaries. Yes, there's a lot of yelling and shouting in boot camps all over the world, but when it comes to the dissemination of information and training recruits, things are a bit calmer in other countries. Like, you don't see the kind of hazing that Americans are used to. The reason for that being that you generally want your recruits to be able to take in as much information as possible while preparing them for their actual stress tests. The American idea of breaking someone down and building them back up into something that can be more easily molded is really an old concept that even the US today is very, very, very slowly starting to shift away from. Actually, a lot of the classic hard-ass drill sergeant shouting fests really stem from Vietnam onwards in terms of how we see it today. So that's why people tend to be a bit confused when they see a more informative and encouraging instructor rather than someone that's, shouting 24/7. That's, okay, there's a hell of a lot more to it than that, and I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert because I'm not. But the point is, Agrena is more typical of instructors you would see outside of the United States. But ultimately, Halo Infinite was not enough to change people's opinions about Spartan 4s. Why is that? Well, for starters, we didn't really see them on screen outside of Griffin's death. We saw their bodies. A lot of players also won't really be bothered to go around and find the audio logs, so they will miss out. And most players just frankly won't read Rubicon Protocol, so really they just see a bunch of dead Spartans and think, oh, they lost. And trust me, winning and losing really sets people's expectations up. Think about it like this. Have we seen the Chief lose in a game? We haven't. He went through Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2, Halo 3, and Halo 4, and was victorious in all of them. Even when he took a beating, even when he suffered a setback, he came out on top at the end. Does Halo 5 really count? No, because you spend most of the game not playing as the Chief. Everyone can come away from it thinking that it isn't the Chief's loss. It's everyone else's loss, not the Chief's loss. And in the case of something like Noble Team, where we do see them lose, not only did they put up one hell of a fight, but they also set up the Master Chief and Halo CE on screen. We see their efforts, their sacrifices, their heroics. Even then, and arguably because of Halo Reach and Ghosts of Onyx by extension, some people still think that Spartan 3s and 2s don't actually perform about on par with one another. Both generations, in reality, are about equal. One just didn't get to spread its wings and fly like the other did. In the case of the Spartan 4s, they've been misrepresented, written poorly, or not given enough time to shine up until this point. However, it isn't just on 343 Industries. Halo's own community has played quite a hand in feeding this misinformation soup. This is going to sound really bad or condescending, but Halo's community doesn't really know much about Halo itself, as in, Halo's community typically studies the basics and otherwise doesn't really look too into things, be it the development of the games, the books, or whatever. That's not necessarily a bad thing, per se. I'd actually say it's quite normal for various communities, not just Halo's. However, Halo, especially in the lore community, it has a very passionate community, and this community doesn't do its homework. Now, I'm not calling out content creators, I'm specifically referring to the community itself. You don't need to go far to find grievous misconceptions or misunderstandings of not just the lore, but of real-life things that people try to apply to the lore, and we're not even going to get into the misunderstandings of the games. My Vindication video has more on this. At the end of the day, the internet is the internet, and people are never going to do their due diligence and research something before talking about it like they're an expert. More often than not, people will really just look at someone else's summary or interpretations of things and, well, they'll take it as gospel without doing a lick of research of their own because, quite frankly, you just need to use enough big words and smart-sounding sentences to sound like you know what you're talking about. This is why you have people claiming the Scorpion tank uses the same gun as the American Patton tank, because one heavily misinformed person made a claim in a YouTube video with essentially no support in the lore other than, oh, the UNSC uses 90mm smoothbore. Like, yes, it's a small caliber, but you know what? That's a tangent for another day. We're gonna stay on topic here. This is made worse by the fact that Halo's community is very divided and honestly quite toxic. I like to say that this community is comprised of three groups of people. You have the Bungo Boos, the Number Boos, and Sane people. Look, this whole thing also deserves its own video, but here is the heavily abbreviated version. Bungo Boos are people that will relentlessly get on their hands and knees to pray to their overlords at Bungie. They believe that not only are Bungie's games unquestionable, perfect masterpieces of gaming history with no errors to them, but that everything Bungie ever wrote was God tier. That 343 Industries was a studio formed by people who hated Halo. That there was some sort of vendetta in the early studio. That every single individual member of the current 343 Industries, down to the damn janitors, are evil. Or is evil. There hasn't been any good lore since Bungie, 343 is the worst dev ever, and the studio needs to be dismantled as a whole, blah 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 blah. They've practically made this an identity for themselves. It almost seems cultish. Despite the fact that while Bungie's Halo games were masterpieces, they were incredible, they weren't without their serious flaws. Bungie also wasn't responsible for stories like The Fall of Reach, First Strike, and Ghosts of Onyx. Eric Nyland was. Bungie had to be strong-armed by Microsoft to play ball. Bungie was notoriously petty and cruel to authors, with a highly toxic and dysfunctional workplace as well, and we won't even get into how it treated the Halo Wars devs. I could write a book about the chaos and missteps of Bungie during its 10-year of making Halo. I'm not taking a jab at the devs of Bungie back then, nor am I trying to slander the names of people at the studio. I'm just stating a simple fact that it wasn't perfect and we shouldn't look at it with rose-tinted lenses. Bungie's Halo was, frankly, messy in the best of times. Development hell, studio infighting, like I said, it deserves its own book. Moving on, Number Boos are essentially a counter-movement to the Bungo Boos. They're people who like certain parts of 343's work and they're tired of constantly taking hate for it. So now they feel the need to almost double down and defend 343 even when it objectively fucks up. Halo Infinite has a predatory shop with overpriced cosmetics? Oh, it could be worse. 343 has a habit of releasing games that are not content complete or missing features? No. They'll just add it with time. Games are harder to make now. You're way too entitled. These folks will defend bad writing, bad business practices, and objectively wrong moves by a dev they say they want to do better. And then there are sane people. Sane people are people that recognize that Halo isn't in a good place right now and hasn't been for some time. They recognize that 343 Industries has had a rough time with things and should do better, period. At the same time, they acknowledge another simple fact. A fact that Microsoft and its policies have played a heavy hand in the problems at 343, such as its contractor debacle. A debacle that seems, well, it seems it hasn't been learned from by new management at 343, mind you. They see that 343 is a studio full of talent and passion and potential, but none of that talent and passion has really been allowed to shine the best it can. They see things like Halo's disaster of a TV show on Paramount, and recognize it's doing more harm than good to the image of the franchise. They recognize that Bungie made good games, but it also made missteps. It was problematic in its own execution at times, while simultaneously understanding that Bungie was quite petty as well. People forget Halo Reach was a spite project, contrary to the official narrative. The end result of all of this is that an already heavily misinformed community now has to contend with malicious actors who will muddy the space due to a bias or vendetta. Bungo Boos will attack recent Halo books and their authors while making claims that show they either didn't read the books, did read the books and just didn't pay attention, or they're lying. Some will say, oh, I don't like the style of writing, and yet Halo has always had a consistent style of writing. Yes, each author has their own flair for things, and in the case of something like the Forerunner trilogy, it's a different vibe entirely, that's indisputable, but for the most part, the writing has remained the same. If you were to put Troy Denning's Shadows of Reach next to Eric Nyland's Ghosts of Onyx, you'll find that both books read quite similarly while having their own distinct styles. And that's a good thing. Both authors, new and old, have captured the vibe of Halo's books, and they do so really well. I've always had a preference for Denning's books, personally, such as Silent Storm and Shadows of Reach, even before I got to interview him, and I will admit I do have a bias now, as I consider him a friend. He's given me some very helpful advice when it comes to being an author, among other things. I also love Kelly Gay's books, in particular Rubicon Protocol, which you should absolutely read. Love that book. Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. I'm not saying that all of the Halo authors write the exact same. Not at all. And if I was, that would frankly be hugely disrespectful and a serious insult to all of them. I'm saying that although they have their own personal flares, ideas, and takes, they generally understand the format of Halo and its novels. A thing that I will always give 343 Industries props on is how it has essentially breathed life into the books. Unlike Bungie, who was again petty, cruel, and uncooperative. 343 has gone out of its way to ensure Halo has a vibrant and extensive collection of books and lore that you can read. Unfortunately, it relies on those books to do the heavy lifting way, way too often. I'm not going to say that you have to read a bunch of books in order to understand the games 343 puts out. You can follow 4, 5, and Infinite just fine, but something that is undeniable is this. 343 Industries has a history of relying on extra material to do the heavy lifting for their narratives. When it comes to a video game like Halo, the books should always be supplemental. They should add to the setting. You don't need to read The Fall of Reach to understand who the Master Chief, Cortana, and Jacob Keyes are in Halo Combat Evolved. The game goes out of its way just introducing you to the characters. You do need to read extra material in order to actually enjoy characters in Halo 5. Didn't watch Halo Nightfall and watch the Halo 2 Anniversary terminals? Guess what? Locke is uninteresting. Didn't read Halo New Blood? Well, now you don't know why Buck isn't with Alpha 9, or what even happened to the squad outside of idle dialogue pertaining to Dare's whereabouts. Didn't read The Fall of Reach, Ghosts of Onyx, or First Strike? Well, guess what? You won't know who Blue Team is in Halo 5 because they are never mentioned in the games at all. Yeah, they're beloved, but only because the books they are in are Halo classics. A new player who hasn't read the books won't get that. Did you read Halo Escalation? Well, you won't know that the Chief reunited with Blue Team until you play Halo 5, and you also won't know what happened to the Didact. Did you read Halo Hunters in the Dark? Guess you won't know anything about Vale then. Halo 4, you can follow the plot just fine, same with Halo 5. However, Halo 4 has a whole exposition dump by the librarian or an imprint of her, but it's very fast-paced, and you won't really be able to digest that in one go. It's a forcible deluge of information that could be overwhelming to the point of blending together for most people. Even after a few playthroughs, you're still probably going to be missing a ton of context unless you are just naturally keyed in to pay attention to these things. Context that won't be missing if you read the Forerunner trilogy, and God help you if you don't at the very least watch the terminals. Halo Infinite is the least egregious of these games. You really don't need to read the books at all. I'd say all the pieces are there, provided you played the previous games. There's a new Cortana model? Well, we had hints of this in Halo 4, and it makes sense that Dr. Halsey would make another Cortana model as a counter to Cortana herself post-Halo 5. Alright, that makes sense. The pilot, or Fernando Esparza, is introduced in the game, and you get a lot of time with him. The benefit of Halo Infinite having a smaller cast is that you get to have more time with each character. Halo Infinite also introduces a lot of stuff. It has huge implications lore-wise. Everything that directly happens in the game is explained and done somewhat neatly, albeit there really isn't a conclusion in the slightest, and in order to achieve what it achieves, it throws almost everything that came before it into plot purgatory. Despite that, you didn't really need to read something like Shadows of Reach. Shadows, you could say, is Infinite's Fall of Reach. Not required in the slightest, but supplemental and greatly enhances the experience. But now, 343 is starting to fall back into its old habits, because it hasn't been able to make campaign DLC or another Halo game for that matter. I'm not about to fire at recent books like Outcasts or Epitaph. These books are phenomenal and really should be read. My concern doesn't stem from the books themselves, but rather what 343 seems to be doing with them. They seem to be either explaining away certain things from Infinite, or hinting at things, or setting things up for future games. While that isn't necessarily a bad thing, I'm still worried that this might be a prelude to another book that adds needed context, even if you're able to play the game and follow along. All of this allows us to come full circle. You might have noticed that I got very off track and stopped talking about Spartans for a while, despite this video being about, well, Spartans. That's because ultimately the problems facing the Spartan 4s are really just symptoms of a wider issue that has affected Halo as a whole. I am super happy that Halo's novels and books are given the love and care they deserve, because they do deserve this love. They have always deserved this love. They didn't deserve the abuse Bungie put them through, but it shouldn't have come at a cost of the experience in the games. How are you supposed to enjoy a character when most of what makes them isn't even in the game? How are you supposed to appreciate and understand a character without reading a book when you need to read that book to understand them to begin with? 343 relies too heavily on its extra material to make things shine. I mentioned earlier on that Halo 5 had every opportunity to make Fireteam Osiris a fleshed out group of characters that people would want to see more of, but didn't. And I think that Halo 5 is the perfect example of the problem. Every single time a character starts to shine in their respective area, it gets shut down or ends prematurely. Locke was an agent for the Office of Naval Intelligence with an impressive record and a penchant for either attempting or suggesting the use of assassination, in particular on the Arbiter himself when Reach fell. He's clearly now a leader with good instincts, a solid head, well, really good reflexes and a wonderfully diverse toolkit at his disposal, including a ton of experimental technology. We see basically none of that in the game. He casually just off Strulum Dama, makes a few quips about the Artemis tracking system, which, let's be real, is just a cosmetic enhancement on the HUD gameplay-wise, and that's it. There's some discussion about his role in Oni's planned attempts on the Arbiter's life, but doesn't really get that much attention, outside of a couple of lines. The Arbiter himself has a rocky relationship with Oni, for very good reasons, and outside of maybe a handful of lines to Locke...
Oni, out of the shadows. The spies announce themselves now, Agent Locke.
I'm a Spartan now, sir.
I know who you are. You were an agent when you volunteered to execute me.
I saved your life today.
We just get nothing from that. There's no consequences to Locke's background or prior actions. There's no ramifications. The Arbiter doesn't justifiably grill him on, you know, Oni. It's just a handful of lines in the game, and that's it. You know what would have made this scene a million times cooler? Thel walks in. He is grateful to Fireteam Osiris for their intervention, but he has some hard things to press Locke on, including the fact that Locke is hunting the Chief, a friend of Thel. Both of them get into it. Things are tense, and so Vale offers to step in. She starts speaking fluently in Sangheili as a means of respecting Thel, his species, and his culture, and she acts as a mediator. How about Meridian? Why couldn't Tanaka have played a similar role? She knows the outer colonies, she gets the culture of the frontier, and recognizes that the UNSC won't be very welcome. So why not have her play an active role in navigating the complex situation Osiris faces there? Why does Locke have to girl boss his way around the whole time? I understand Sloane was an agent for Cortana, but there was still potential there. Example, when you're on Meridian talking to the colonists, people are hostile to Locke when you try to talk to them.
We might be able to help. Where was that transmission sent from?
UNSC swooping down to take our claim. I'll tell you what, our folks at Apogee are plenty strong. Don't think you vultures can pick the bone so fast.
Why not have Tanaka come in and, you know, mediate? And Buck is a recognizable figure. Why not have him discuss Alpha 9 more? Why not have him be a bit more standoffish when it comes to the Sangheili? Buck is a guy with humor, but play ODST, he is more than willing to get tough with folks. Halo Infinite did an excellent job portraying the Spartan 4 as well, but its flaw was that none of the 4s got time to shine on screen beyond one brief moment with Griffin in his final moments. I get part of Infinite's theme was the Master Chief coming in to save a shattered UNSC, but we could have gotten something. We could have found Spartans, Marines, ODSTs, and rallied them and kept to this theme. What I'm getting at is this. 343 makes good characters when it wants to, but it never gives those characters enough time to shine as themselves. They are ultimately slaves to the plot on screen. They don't take initiative, they don't act, they react. They don't actively try to problem solve, they kind of just move forwards and the solution falls into their laps. Fireteam Osiris doesn't need to solve the issue of finding the Chief after Meridian because, oh look, Roland coincidentally figured out how to find them. The Master Chief just knows where Cortana is because he got a vision! And Blue Team doesn't immediately object to this or assume he's badly concussed and have Fred step up. They just believe him go, oh, they can't court-martial us all right. And when there are chances for these characters to really show off, they don't because the plot just resolves himself. The Arbiter starts to talk to Locke about his background and the Chief, and then suddenly, oh look, Cortana pops up, says one line, and suddenly, oh look, the Arbiter's game. He's ready to go. He's ready to take action.
Let him hunt. He'll never find us. It's Cortana. She touched every networked device in the camp. She knows the Guardian is here.
Locke, that thing's our last shot.
You have the firepower to get us in there.
Sunayan is the Covenant's final stronghold on Sanghelios.
See what I mean? We get a game with terrible portrayals of Spartan 4s, a game with solid portrayals strangled to death by a bad writing bout and an over-reliance on extra material for character development, and a game with amazing portrayals that are only accessible via audio logs and a book. All of this is made worse by a deeply divided community that often cannot get its own narrative straight, a community so misinformed and unable to police itself that the only one who will ever be able to get the record in order is 343, which they don't. That is why people don't like Spartan 4s. That is why people think they are bad when there is so much greatness behind them. Spartan 4s have been given a bad hand. Let them onto the stage, 343. Let them kick ass.